Okay, let's continue with notes from the book How We Decide. Credit cards make us spend more money because we don't as clearly associate the purchase with the feeling of loss, the loss of your money. Because if you pay with cash, the feeling of loss of money is more clearly pronounced, and you become more reluctant, basically, to spend that money. So people are much more inclined to spend money with credit cards over cash if they were paying with cash. So credit cards, if you're using credit cards to pay, it literally weakens the negative emotions associated with purchase. The price you pay feels lower because it's not just numeric, it's highly emotional when you evaluate what you're paying and what you're getting. And payment plans apply to this too. We aren't able to tangibly match as clearly the long-term pain of paying the price compared to the instant benefit of obtaining the thing we want when the price is stretched out or delayed. This is similar to bad habits. Imagine that the consequences of diabetes, the health complications, maybe the physical ramifications, rather than if you do this for 10 years, then your body just gets worse and worse. What if, let's say, every single day you woke up with the body condition of, if you were to repeat the way you ate yesterday for the rest of your life, what would your body be like? Or like for 10 years, what would your body be like? And then you would immediately be like, I hate the way I feel. I feel heavy. I feel uncomfortable. I feel like not nauseous or whatever. Or like if you ate like nothing but burgers and pizza yesterday, and then you would stop eating burgers and pizzas because you know you're gonna feel like shit tomorrow. And so that's an extreme example, but that's like a more that's like an easier to connect example of how delayed pain makes us value it less on the scale against the benefit of what we get. Less resistance to your impulsivity. So when you pay with credit cards over cash, because of how easy it is to pay, it basically weakens your resistance against your impulsive feelings. An auction ticket, so they auctioned a ticket as an experiment, or they auctioned a set of tickets or whatever to a group of undergraduates and in one auction the students could only, participants, the test subjects would auction with their credit cards, and in another auction they could only participate in the auction with cash. The auction for the same product with a very similar set of students or subjects, the auction for the same ticket went twice as high when the payment method was credit cards. When offered a short-term option and a better option, but it's delayed, different parts of the brain are activated. The rational brain activates for the immediate and the short-term option or the immediate reward, and the prefrontal cortex and long-term planning regions of your brain are activated for the delayed option. More emotions mean more impulsivity. The winner of this tug of war, so it's like the emotional part versus the long term, the prefrontal cortex, and they studied this. They like hooked up the brains to the MRI, and they realized that whether or not people, so whether or not you feel emotions is not what determines how you make the decision or how strongly you feel the emotions. The main determiner for what decision you make is based on which section of the brain shows more activation. it's quite literally like a war, right? It's like, which one activates stronger? So Herman, the guy who helps people get out of debt, like credit card debt, who starts by cutting up people's credit cards, he has the quote, which refers to the credit card offers. He says, "Read only the fine print. The bigger the print, the less it matters," which I think is interesting. Okay, so they did another test, and they did this test. They didn't have to conduct the test. They used existing data and analyzed it for this experiment. So they didn't have to conduct it they just analyzed pre-existing data, and they found that of the credit card offers, there was one credit card that offered 4.9% interest for the first 6 months and 16% interest for the rest of your credit card duration usage. So the interest goes up to is at 16% for the majority of the time. And the second credit card option is 4.9% interest for the first 6 months promotion, which is 2% less for the first 6 months. And so the first one was 6.9% and 14%, and the second one was 4.9% and 16%. So one of them is 2% less for the first 6 months and 2% more for the rest of the time. And they found that the one that was 2% less for the first 6 months, but 2% more for the rest of your lifetime, got triple the acceptance rate. So 3 times as many. This offer was 3 times as effective in getting people to sign up. And basically, it's saying even though the second one accounts for a much longer period of your time with that credit card, people still chose the short-term one because it looked better. And that's basically the idea of the short-term versus long-term. We don't accurately evaluate the long-term price we pay when we weigh options. So an example solution that they made for getting people to make long-term solutions is to put a delay before the short-term option, so that the short-term option, let's say I wanted you to choose wisely. So let's say I could give you $50 today or $100 in a week. So a lot of people this decision can be very divided, for example, between people. Or let's say a month. There will be a lot of division in people. But if I said, I will give you $50 in a month or $100 in 2 months, again, there's a 1 month gap between these options, but the vast majority of people at this point will pick the $100. The division will be much less clear. So if you put a delay between the short-term option, then both options become long-term options, and there's just the time difference. And then people will choose the bigger reward, generally. So what they did was they adjusted 401k plans where they would where they pitch for the 401k plans, and they said, we will automatically start saving for your 401k in 3 months after you start working with us, instead of starting right away and going, how much do you want to put in? And they go, we'll start it in a few months. How much of your salary do you want to put in? And when they did this kind of pitch, way more people signed up for way more money or whatever. I don't exactly know how all this works, how 401 works exactly, but basically to put a delay before the short term, then both options become long-term options, and people make better long-term decisions when they're comparing long-term options with the long-term options and not long-term options with short-term options. So sometimes what you need is to not get what you want. When you panic, your perception is incredibly narrow. You think that your brain has a default option. Your brain jumps to the default option. For example, maybe you see something that you feel that the default option must be to run away from it. And once you're in this narrow thinking, it's very difficult for you to think of abilities other than running away. So, for example, let's say you are running away from what's something that's dangerous? Let me think. Okay, I'll give you the example in the book, and this is actually an example that shows up in a number of different books, but it's the book with the fire and how firefighters started using escape fires. So when they saw the massive fire and they decided to give up and run away, their default option was, if I make it to this location, I'll be safe. And so as soon as they thought this, every single part of their bodies and brains were focused on achieving that goal. And this kind of focus and narrowing of perception is an evolutionary function, because if you're too distracted, then you're going to be less effective at achieving that goal. So we developed default options. And so here's the thing. And yeah, the person who didn't have their perception narrowed created the escape fire and survived and so on. But that's not really the point that I want to mention in this context. The important thing that you actually want to use is to say, if something happens in a conversation, generally speaking, you're not actually in crisis. And so sometimes you have to be able to control your panic and actually broaden your perception. And the example here is, if you think of, imagine the ideal CEO in your head that you know, your team leader that you want to work for. You bring to him urgent news, something happened. What you want his reaction to be, you want him to be calm. You want him to react calmly. Doesn't mean he's not going to find the solution. Doesn't mean he's not going to work for it. But he's going to be able to be calm and maybe say the same thing. But at least he can respond at his discretion rather than being controlled by the news. And so maybe you are informed that you got a bad grade. Maybe you're informed that there's a test tomorrow. Anxiety doesn't help anyone. Well, in these cases, it is good to focus on the false solution, such as studying. But if you're panicked in the meantime, then you weren't actually able to absorb information. Another example, and this won't be panic, but if you're triggered emotionally. And when I say triggered, I don't mean like, the medical issues. But I mean like if someone says something that may touch on your weakness, and I don't mean they say something that you're sensitive about, but maybe maybe you're very weak with, let's say you were betrayed in the past, and so you're very sensitive to any signs that could hint at betrayal. And so someone says, okay, we need to have a talk, and you go, oh my god, and you start panicking. Or maybe you have trust issues. Okay, actually that's kind of the same thing. Okay, let's try different. Let's say your parents maybe neglected you in the past. Maybe, or rather than neglect, maybe they were just really busy with work and they weren't around very much. So you have this need for attention. And so when someone isn't, so when maybe you're in a group conversation and people aren't really responding to your messages, you kind of get the fired up a bit somewhere. So and my point is, maybe something happens that triggers your weakness in this sense, right? Whether it's something, it can be something small, but it activates your emotions. So let's say that happens. That's when you most need to harness the ability to calm down. And the reason I say this is because that's what I need to work on the most right now in this context. And that doesn't mean there's not other things to work on, but that's one of my weaknesses. And I think that this one is likely common. The prefrontal cortex is what makes humans unique. It gives us our ability to think in the abstract form, to think about things that are not in front of us, to think about a future that is better, to think about a future that is worse that we must avoid, to think about situations that don't exist, to invent things using our imagination this way. The prefrontal cortex is what makes humans unique and gives us our ability to think in the abstract. Okay, that's going to be it for my notes. And one interesting thing that I want to bring up is that in our head, this is something I thought of while I was brushing my teeth just now. And this is just a note. It's not about some objective fact. It's not some philosophical idea. It's not even profound, but it was just a thought I had. Maybe something like a shower thought. If we were to project, like if we had something that could read our neurons and which the way the neurons are activated and directly project that, whether it's in words or an image, onto a screen, and you could see it in HD, basically. It would be blurry, it would be ugly, and it would be missing a lot of details. And we would be shocked at how undetailed it is. Because in our head, we have the impression that it's these holistic ideas, that these comprehensive thoughts. We have these ideas of imagery that is very profound, maybe beautiful, maybe anger-inducing, happiness-inducing. We feel that it is full of vitality and detail. But the fact is, the thoughts that we actively have are extremely specific and narrow. And we don't actually have the full picture. A lot of it is very peripheral. And there's a third one. So there's like focus, peripheral vision, and there's one even outside of peripheral vision, but I don't actually know how it is. And so we picture an idea with a very high degree of focus and precision, and we have this peripheral idea that it's a very concrete, a very cohesive idea. And if we were to write it down, if we could see it visually, and read it, the idea would be like, seem so stupid. It would be missing so many details. If it was an image, it would be one very small detail, and the rest would just be all blurry. It would be completely lacking detail. Because our imagination is, and the thing is, the reason we have this, the main thing that I want to point out is that our impression that it's so much more detailed than it is, that we know so much more about it than we do, is not actually that far off from when we actually see things in HD. Because we don't actually see that many details. We don't actually know that much about the idea at a time. We have to actually really look into them to understand it better. We have to really draw out the picture to add the details. We have to look here, look there. We have to narrow down the details to actually see everything when we look at a picture. we have to read a sentence word by word to really know what every word is, because our brain is so good. Now, when I say we have to, I just mean in the situation that we feel it is necessary. In other words, activate system 2. Now, I'm not saying that you should spend your time doing that. The thing is, our brain is very good at heuristics. It's very efficient, and that's a good thing. That is a strength. We omit details that are unnecessary. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that you should look at every detail. What I'm saying is to be aware that we naturally omit details and to not be arrogant about our knowledge of details. That's all. The awareness that we don't actually accept all the variables. That's the difference. That I think is important. It's not important to go and look at every detail. Makes no fucking sense to do.